morning you're at. My name is Lauren Belor, and I am one of the Democracy Directors for State Innovation Exchange. We are so delighted to have you all for this conversation on Black women legislators leading in agriculture policy. Just for some framing of today's webinar, one, it will be recorded just for reference, and we'll be sure to follow up with the recording following today's webinar. So from historical context, agriculture policy has been made in spaces dominated by rural, land-owning, white, male, and conservative voices. And that has included state legislatures, which fewer than 5% of legislators are Black women. And that has been recognized through our 6 and Noble Women, co-led 50-state analysis through our No Democracy Without Black Women report that looked at the underrepresentation of Black women in state legislatures. Far too often, there are limited opportunities for Black women legislators to be at the forefront of policy conversations in agriculture or related legislative committees, and that has to indeed change. So we are so delighted to have a panel of 4 dynamic Black women state legislators who are leading on this conversation, addressing the vast injustices that have been endured by Black and Brown communities in the field of agriculture. You'll hear about their work today and more about inclusive change around agriculture policy. So we're gonna kick off first with an opportunity to hear from each of them in a brief introduction, and we will begin with Delaware Senator Marie Pinckney. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, everyone. I am State Senator Marie Pinckney, representing Delaware, newly elected. I was elected in 2020. I am also the vice chair of agriculture. Interestingly enough for me, I don't come from a ag background. I didn't have any history in it, but I was interested in the way that it impacts Black and Brown communities. And so I asked my leadership to allow me an opportunity to be a member of the Ag Committee, and to my surprise, I ended up as vice chair. So I am very much in a learning space, but excited to be a part of agriculture. Excited to have this amazing conversation with my colleagues across the country today.
Thank you so much, Senator Pinkney. And up next, we want to give the floor and pass the mic to Ohio Representative Juanita Brent. Representative Brent, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Juanita Brent. I just happen to be a state representative for House District 12, which is near Cleveland, Ohio. So I've had the opportunity to be the ranking member on Agriculture and Conservation Committee now for 2 General Assemblies, where anything from hemp to making a special day for trees has occurred. So would have never thought that I would have been the ranking member, and I definitely don't want to continue holding on the ranking as being the first and only Black woman or Black person that's been the ranking on agriculture. So even though sometimes we ask for certain things, you never thought you would be the first. You don't want to keep on holding on to that title.
Thank you so much, Representative Brent. And up next to introduce themselves, we have North Carolina Senator Natalie Murdock. Senator Murdock, passing it to you.
All right, hello everyone. Looking forward to spending the afternoon with you all. Senator Natalie Murdock out of North Carolina. And I believe I'm one of only 2 members of the General Assembly that was a soil and water supervisor first, and went from there directly to serving in the General Assembly. I believe one of our representatives out west was the first to do it, and I'm the second. So at that time was actually one of only 4 Black women in the state that was a soil and water supervisor. So I would go to conferences and regional meetings, and they always thought I was staff, would say, no, I'm unelected, I'm a soil and water supervisor. And so came in really wanting to be on the Ag, Energy, and Environment Committee. Had to give up redistricting for it. That was painful. So I was appointed in the middle of a term. And so my first full term, my full biennium assignments, that's when I was able to pick up Ag, Energy, and Environment. And a lot going on in North Carolina. We are hopefully on the verge of legalizing medical cannabis, even though it will be highly restrictive, probably one of the most restrictive behind Utah. But we are still working through that process. And my colleagues know I've been very upfront and honest about wanting to center equity in all of my agricultural work and come from an agricultural background. My grandfather was actually a farmer. My mom grew up on a farm, huge agricultural community here in North Carolina. It's actually the #1 industry in our state, which is another reason I wanted to join the committee. The other issue that we face here in North Carolina, we do have a land grant institution that is an HBCU. North Carolina Central is behind me, but North Carolina A&T State University is a land grant institution, and we have so much inequity between our HBCU land grant and our PWI land grant. So that is every budget. We always fight to make sure there is parity and equity with funding and research opportunities for our students at our HBCUs. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Senator Murdock. And next up, as one of our final panelists, will be Illinois Representative Sonia Harper. So Representative Harper, please feel free to take it away with the intro.
Greetings, everyone, and hello to my friends, Juanita and Senator Murdock. Hello, Senator Marie. It is an honor to be with you guys today. My friends in agriculture, as already stated, I am the chairman of agriculture in the state of Illinois, the first Black person to hold that spot. I'm also the chairman of the Joint Black Caucus here. And before I even got into no, I am not from a farming background, but I am from a community on the south side of Chicago, Inglewood, where food access has been an issue for us for quite some time. And we decided to take our own food access into our own hands by creating urban agriculture districts and teaching people more about farming and so forth and so on. And so I've been taking that work from the community and passing policy in the legislature for the past 7 years, whether it's dealing with farmer equity, making sure that we're properly defining socially disadvantaged farmers, whether it's helping to create incentives so that farmers can do more work to create our own local healthy food system, or just educating our residents on nutrition and growing and healthy living. And so I'm very excited to be a part of this panel today, talking about Black women in agriculture and our role in helping to shape policy as it relates to what is in some of our states the top job producing industry, and making sure that we are definitely getting all that we are due in that field. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Harper. And as you can see from the dynamic introductions from each of these lovely legislators' backgrounds, there's familiarity with each other, having worked in this space, but also you're hearing a little bit about the importance of this space, already the narratives from their personal backgrounds, and it really sets the tone for today's conversation. I'm also wanting to note that today's conversation is really to act as an inspiration for other legislators. For starters, farm equity issues do include Black farmer legislation. It's very important to break the dominance of male conservative voices in this space, and really give note to the Black women legislators that are leading on these issues, and also looking at the impact that COVID-19 has had on Black farmers and the key role that state legislators can play in advancing equitable farm policy. And also, we want this to feel like ongoing dialogue, like family, so to speak, coming together for today's conversation. So we will have a question and answer portion with the audience members as well, and feel free to be extremely engaging. And so to kick off the framework of today's conversation, because agriculture can sometimes seem as like a siloed policy issue area that doesn't necessarily, or some people deem doesn't necessarily have the intersectionality of policy issues, but yet it does. Can you each tell us why agriculture and why now? What makes agriculture important at this time and why it should resonate with many different communities? And I'll start across the board of my Zoom webinar timeline and start with Senator Murdock.
Yeah, I think why now is I think there's, for one, just a reemergence of particularly Black people being really excited about agriculture and being connected to land. Here in North Carolina, we have a huge community of new young Black farmers, which make me really excited. We even have our own. It started off as Black August in the park, and now we have a Black Farmer series that goes across the entire state. And also, even in the food space, we have restaurant owners, one of which in Durham, quick plug to him, Wellies. It is the only Zimbabwean restaurant actually in all of America that we're aware of, and connected with him just from wanting to locally source his food. We've been working with the county commission to locally source food. So I think there's just kind of an overall movement of wanting local, wanting clean, wanting healthy. But what we also know in the food space, it is predominantly white. I'm reading a book now about working to diversify our farmers markets and kind of the history there. We felt that even in Durham, that is very brown, very Black. Of Black farmers not feeling welcome at the local farmers market. So I think whether it's local or at the state level, these were disparities that we found. I'm also I think the time is now because folks are finding it to be difficult to even get into these markets, whether it's you're legalizing cannabis and you're having a difficult time getting a dispensary up and running, or you want to get into industrial hemp and you don't have the resources, or what we found here in North Carolina, even with the application process for industrial hemp, they didn't even ask for race or ethnicity. So we didn't even have a way to track the diversity of who was even getting these licenses. So I think those of us that are passionate about this space just continue to see then equity, especially when it comes to financing. If you come from a family and you don't come from a lot of wealth and you don't have six figures to put into this industry, it can be really difficult. And so I also think there's a movement of folks getting together to say, how can we even afford to play ball in this space? How can I get access to land? How can I work with other investors if I, want to start a dispensary or want to invest? So I think it's been honestly pretty organic as a sign of the times. Social equity period is something that we are all talking about now. And we have to make sure that the agricultural field is not left behind as we're having those discussions of how can we be more inclusive? How can we be more diverse, especially in the South when, as we know, coming after Reconstruction, there was a lot of Black land ownership, and over time that land was stolen from them. So I think it's also a time of reconciliation where folks say, how can we, for one, hold on to the land that is in Black hands, especially in the South, but how can you grow that? How can folks like me say, okay, I have some heirs property and I want to figure out how to maintain that and to keep that land ownership in my family. So I think that's a part of the renaissance that we're experiencing now.
Yes, that's a very, very excellent point, Senator Murdock. Even we've seen in popular culture relative to the sign of the times, a gift of kindness to a loved one or a significant other now is land ownership. It's not just flowers and jewelry, it is now land ownership. And that's a huge, huge conversation point. And I understand that from a personal narrative through my own family background, but also hearing that as definitely a sign of the times. Senator Pinkney, why agriculture and why now for you?
Excellent question. I think for me, it kind of goes back to a word that you used earlier, Lauren, is the intersectionality of it all. I'm a social worker by trade, so mental health is kind of my background and it's my passion. And one of the first things that I learned kind of about the farming community is the significant mental health concerns that happen for farmers. So Senator Murdock just talked about, the heirs that come along with family. And so to me, thinking about the possibilities of Black farmers out there, like losing their farm, losing their ability to maintain their birthrights and what that does to the mental health of them, I think was one of the first things that drew me to this work. Curiosity, I think, is another part of it. I'm just being honest. I was curious about this field that is the #1 industry in Delaware as well, but that does not get a lot of conversation. We don't really talk about it. The year before I was elected, the Ag Committee had one committee hearing the entire session. So this field that is so important to our state gets no attention. And so I was curious about it. And there's also been a really interesting movement. So Delaware is a pretty interesting state. It's a very straight line of a state. And the top county where I live and represent is very urban, suburban, and then the further down the state you go, that's where most of the ag takes place. But there's been an interesting movement up in this area of urban agriculture, and so I have found that just to be incredibly powerful. That in the middle of the city, you have these amazing urban farms, and a lot of the work that is being done in them, particularly by Black farmers, has also been intersectional, right? So there is a big movement that there are urban farms that utilize their spaces as violence reduction centers to get kids off of the street. We have another one that works with reentry. So people coming right out of our prison systems get to go right into urban farming and have job opportunities and use their hands and take pride in the work that they're doing. And so I wanted to be a part of supporting that. I wanted to be a part of bringing attention to this industry that's so important to our state, but that people are just not having enough conversations around.
Thank you so much, Senator Pinkney. You brought up two really good points. One, using your platform within the legislature to bring attention and notoriety to such an important and dominating issue in your state, but also mental health is also a sign of the times. And that is something that is extremely interesting because people are still yearning for some balance coming off of COVID-19. So that'll be interesting to dive a little bit further into in today's conversation. Representative Brent, why agriculture and why now for you?
Well, I thank you so much for the question. And I think it's not so much why agriculture now. Agriculture has always been here. It's always been something of concern, but is a thing of going to other places in the world and realizing we're not as concerned about agriculture as we should be. And one thing people always ask me, like, why are you so concerned about agriculture? I'm gonna just keep it very basic. Everyone eats. So as long as you are consuming something, you're consuming food, even if you're consuming that fast food, it came from somewhere. And in theory, it should have came from an animal. It might have came from a factory, but everyone eats. We all are consumers. So we have to, at basic level, be concerned on where our food is coming from and how our food is being handled. And so that a lot of those regulations start right within the state house. It starts very much on a state level, and that dictates what ends up rolling over to our federal level. So we all have to be very concerned about that. And I've lived in different parts of my own house district where you can go to one grocery store and the food could be the best. And everyone knows if you go to grocery store A, you're going to get some of the best produce, best meat. You could go to grocery store B, not far away from there, and the quality of food is so different. Why is that? So everyone should be concerned about agriculture. Everyone should be concerned about soil quality, because you should be concerned on what are they putting those seeds in. Here in Cleveland, we have high problems with lead within our ground. So as many hoop houses, and there's a lot of African Americans who have hoop farms within our area, we have to be concerned about soil quality because this has high levels of lead. Even with the best intentions, if we are not testing soil for your grandma who's out there growing the turnips and the tomatoes and she's giving it to you and all your cousins, that's not good for us if we are consuming the same thing that we're trying to get rid of, and that's lead. So just a whole place, agriculture is so important because we've gone through generations of people, particularly in urban communities, who weren't always testing their soil. So it's like, well, what can we do as a state to make sure that people have better access to that, or they use raised bed gardens so they can make sure that it's not in actual ground that's contaminated. So so many different conversations. So I almost cringe when people are like, well, that's a rural thing. I said, well, don't you eat food? And you don't have to live in a rural community to eat food. So we all need to be equally concerned about agriculture. Right now, it's very trendy of this farm to table method. Cleveland has tons of them downtown. They all have like a little thing on their wall saying we're farm to table, but what farm? So like, is it a farm that's nearby? Is it a farm that's around a corner? And so sometimes you hear farmers who are complaining that everyone's saying it's farm to table, but the farm that they're getting it from is not even from Ohio. So it's just always been a very concern for myself. And then when you even look at what we're seeing with our different farm bureaus, you don't even hardly see representation when it comes to the pictures that are being put out of what farming looks like. And we know that if we even go back farther than slavery, Black people were the masters at farming. Before we got into the industrial age, Black people were farming. We were doing this for the longest. So this is not something that's new for Black people. This is something we've been doing forever. I think it's just bringing that social media has been able to allow us to amplify our voices in a very unapologetic way about it.
I mean, I knew this was going to be a dynamic conversation, and this is only question one, but you all are dropping so many gems. There was just so much said on that, Representative Brent. One, basically that farming in itself has been gentrified or monopolized and given like this hipster connotation by taking something that was in origin belonging to the rights of one particular demographic, and then taking it and monopolizing on it through capitalism and making more money off of it by selling it at higher prices and not necessarily taking in consideration the farms, of much of which was stolen land. I mean, there's so much here to unpack. So thank you so much for raising awareness to that, but also for highlighting the importance of food access and the limitations that has from our urban planning perspective, but also economic disadvantages as well, because if it's farm to table, it's probably going to be higher in expense, and groceries are already high. So these are all good segues. Representative Harper, same question to you. Why agriculture and why now?
Well, yes, I want to start off the same way Rep. Brent started off and say that, agriculture is not new. Food access is not new. Food is medicine. We already know that, right? Our health depends on our very access to it. And so basically here in the state of Illinois, we've decided to just take our food access into our own hands by trying to grow our own urban farming districts, right? I spent a lot of time working at an urban farm in Chicago, trying to spread the news and awareness about opportunities in agriculture, how we need to see this as another way and a new way of bringing in not just healthy food, but jobs, right? And businesses. Part of my personal testimony that I always share is that at the age of 33, I became the oldest person in my family. And I believe that that's simply because they died from preventable diet-related diseases. And that's because we live in a food desert, right? A food desert that is also at the intersection of other injustices in our community, whether it be with healthcare, whether it be with school funding. And so that depends on our health depends on agriculture, our economics depend on it, right? So many times in the Black community, we're always asking for jobs, asking for companies to come. This is a way that we can create our own jobs and create our own sustainable jobs and create our own sustainable economy. I often like to preach there are so many opportunities along the food system, right? From soils to seeds, to planting, to transplanting, to retail, to catering, to education. And if we think about, how there's been such a lack of that, especially in our urban centers, we could be using that lack as new opportunities and changing the policy to kind of help that. The future of our communities depend on agriculture. I've heard that in the future, our millionaires are going to be the farmers. And how is the Black community, how are we prepared to either eat or not eat? We're going through COVID, where it has definitely shined a light on some of the injustices, but we already knew that these food injustices existed. How can we now take advantage of this new trendy nature of wanting to help communities, wanting to help with food equity, wanting to help Black farmers, right? Because we've been screaming about Black farmers for years, but now all of a sudden it's cool and trendy, right? But how do we take advantage of this moment to put in some sustainable change and not just let companies get away with feeling good about giving out some food boxes or giving out scholarships. And so that's why agriculture, and that's why right now, and I think that right now we have an amazing opportunity to take some leaps forward that maybe we haven't been able to do before, simply because of this new lens on equity, simply because of people like Representative Brent and Senator Murdock and Senator Pinkney, who are now in leadership positions in their own states, able to put some of our food access, farmer equity issues at the forefront. So that's why I say agriculture now, move fast, move innovatively, move carefully. But I think that this is definitely our time to make some good headway in this area for our communities for years to come.
Thank you so much, Representative Harper. And again, you also touched on some very important points about some of the opportunities that lend themselves to what is now trendy. Unfortunately, things that tend to be trendy tend to a lot of times be stolen. So, you know, there's a lot of, can we borderline say cultural appropriation of Black farming? And that leads to looking at the opportunities that Black farmers, but also just Black and Brown communities have to look inside of this from a policy standpoint. So when we look at the current, you guys have already provided your background as it relates to farming. When we look at the current makeup of agricultural and quote unquote rural committees across the country, as we mentioned, many of them are dominated by conservative and rural landowning white men. What has it been like for you to be on your state's agriculture committee, let alone in a leadership role, and especially as Black women? And this time I'll take it backwards and start with Representative Harper.
Sure. So just because, you know, I had an interest just from being from a community that's a food desert, a community that's on the forefront of trying to create our own urban agriculture districts. This was the work that I was literally day to day embedded in before I would say I was stolen away to the General Assembly, because it was not my plan. I was totally happy with just creating urban farms in Inglewood and figuring out how to take that to another level, and even creating more urban and rural partnerships. But I'm sorry, I have just forgot the question. What was the original question you asked me?
No problem. So considering that, you know, these ag and rural committees are
I
dominated.
got it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I got it. You were asking me about my experience on the ag committee. So it's so funny. Coming from this background, you know, I knew, hey, we're doing this in Chicago. I think it's great. We need some more benefits for urban farmers, but I'm sure that there are other places across the state that are food deserts that want to take their food access into their own hands, that need to know what to do with their vacant land. And so I requested, you know, from leadership to get on the agriculture committee. You know, to my surprise, the agriculture committee was not hearing any issues related to food at all. They were more concerned with deers and hunting and gun rights and so forth and so on. And so there has been a lot of like personal work on my part in the past 7 years, just defining what a food desert was, right? I remember being in committee one day trying to pass legislation, because before you can attack a problem, you have to define it, right? So trying to educate. My state is similar to how Senator Pinckney described her state. Chicago, we're up north, we're blue, we're more urban, but the whole rest of the state of Illinois is rural and red, right? And so you could imagine what the makeup of our agriculture committee was. When I joined, I believe I was the only Black member, and I was still the only Black member when I became a committeeman, but chairman, but I am happy to say that even when we had another administration that could care less about, I would say, Black people and our food access issues, I was able to educate the Department of Agriculture, the extra members on the committee, as to what a food desert was, what we're doing in our community, what urban farming is. To them, it was, oh, you guys aren't doing anything but gardening in your backyard. And I remember, again, when I was trying to pass the food desert legislation, I was literally laughed at by my, you know, counterparts in committee, saying, oh my goodness, you can't tell me that you guys in Chicago can't eat, until I had to explain to him again what a food desert is. And again, going beyond that, what are some of the remedies to that, right? And so being on the agriculture committee, I've been able to pass legislation such as the Farmer Equity Act, which basically asks that you take farmers of color into account when you're making all decisions at the State Department level, but that you're also make sure you're disseminating information about programs and grants and funding to farmers. We're also now doing a farmer disparity study in the state of Illinois, which I'm very happy about, to go in to find what are those real issues that are really barriers to farmers keeping their land, farming on their land, being active participants in the current industry. And so, yeah, just to sum up, my agriculture committee had not been hearing any issues related to food, had not been hearing any issues related to farmer equity. And again, I was laughed at in my face when, as a new legislator, I was trying to bring these issues to the forefront in the General Assembly. 7 years later, thank God, with the help of so many coalitions I've had to organize on my own on the ground around the state just to help to pass policy in Springfield. And we have a new governor, which is a good thing. There's now a different response to that, right? And so that foundation that we laid in just educating the other policymakers, educating the other members of committee, now we're actually able to take advantage of policy to remedy some of those problems that I'm now able to bring up in committee and get some action on. So yeah, that's just a little bit of the landscape of what the Ag Committee looks like in the state of Illinois. And what I've been hearing is it's kind of similar in other states as well, which makes convenings like this all the more worthwhile and useful. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Harper. And it does sound like education is a common thread many times dealing with any legislature and any policy issue. Representative Brent, I'll turn it over to you with the same question.
Thank you so much. Particularly, I'm grateful to be the ranking member on agriculture and conservation, but I always hate that, like I said in my intro, that I'm the first. So part of my goal of even being in this space is trying to encourage other people, particularly my Black legislators, to be like, hey, you need to get on the Ag Committee, because some of the most problematic bills that we've had, where our state house just tried to repeal the Clean Water Act, which is a federal thing. Now we repealing it on the state level, happens all within the Ag Committee. And so I just tell people, like, this stuff is so relevant. I have the fortunate to say that Louis Stokes, who was the first African-American congressman out of Ohio, he ran on an ag platform. He was a Black man, because Cuyahoga River kept on catching on fire, actually caught on fire 14 times, which goes right through Cleveland. And so I had to school a bunch of people, mostly white people, on why ag, and particularly the Clean Water Act, is so important to just people, or just particularly Black people. Like, this is not something that we are just not concerned about. So it's very problematic. You can understand, I see a lot of times where people have been, different lobbyists have been knowing each other for so long. And because Ohio has term limits, we only have a short period of time where you're gonna go over to another chamber, or you're not gonna be at the state house. So it gives a lot more of our lobbyists who have been in this ag field a lot longer, way more of an upper hand. So that's just very problematic when it comes to being in this space. And so everyone knows each other. Before I was a ranking member, it was a gentleman who is a farmer, and he had been the ranking member for so long. So a lot of lobbyists and even some of my colleagues were almost like crying for him when they removed him and put me in that space. And I never asked for it. That was a thing. I asked to be on the committee, but I did not ask to remove him. And so I had to find an ally in him for him to say, like, hey, she didn't take me out. She just fought to be here a little bit harder. So I think in a sense of having to find allies is vital. I realized within my first 30 days, that was so vital, that I grew to find allies, because it was a lot of people who just weren't comfortable with me being in this space. And I say they weren't comfortable because they weren't used to anybody Black being in this space. And people are getting to the point where they're realizing too, that it's going to be a Black woman who's going to say something. And I am going to talk about race, and I am going to talk about cultural competency. I am going to talk about how there's a lack of equity. So it's a whole thing, like, we're just going to deal with these issues. And so no one thought that race was ever going to come up on ag. And this is not to carry on a lot of ways, but realizing that race is an issue that affects so many different things, particularly agriculture. And so we've had a lot of very uncomfortable conversations about removing the Confederate flag at the state fair, and also dealing with our hemp license, and about how it disproportionately affects African Americans. Like, we're gonna talk about race. Everything is gonna go back to that topic, being the first Black woman, and not saying that I have to always carry that torch, but I wouldn't be who I am if I did not talk about those issues within that space. So it makes it sometimes, I feel like I wish some of my colleagues would be that concerned, but why would somebody be concerned when it's not an issue that's not affecting the skin that they sit in every day? So that's just definitely some of the things of working with my colleagues and doing my best to make sure that people get to know me and me get to know people. So even putting myself, having to go out to a hunting event with one colleague, and then also going to go see another colleague's bean farm, just to kind of understand like what their thoughts are on things. So building our relationships have been very vital, but then being very unapologetic that there's not equity, there's missing a lot of equity, and that racism is still a factor when it comes to agriculture, are conversations that are so needed being in this role, talking to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Representative Brent. One, for just showing how you balance being unapologetic, but also being open to building relationships and rapport within your committee, because those shared experiences can help build better conversations and dialogue on ag committees. Also, completely understand where you're coming from. I am originally from Michigan. I understand the term limits, and many times, you don't know whether the lobbyist is the legislator or just because they are there longer. And we will get back to that a little further in the conversation as well. Senator Murdock, same question for you.
Yeah, so the irony of this question is we would have had a very different experience. So North Carolina is, it's not as red as people think it is, because we have a Democratic governor, we have Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, but we are not a super minority. So we still have leverage, we still have the ability to get things moved and passed. And so I would say that because we came into this year, since I was appointed last year, thinking we were going to take the Senate. And everyone said, oh, well, you're, came from Soul and Water. So, you're going to be one of the chairs of the Ag Committee. So I'm, all excited and ready to do all this great work. And we did not take the Senate. And so in North Carolina, all of our leadership positions in the Senate are in the majority. In the House, they have some Dems that co-chair some committees, but it is not like that in the Senate. So luckily, our ranking Dem is also based in Durham. And so we tag team a lot to get things pushed through, particularly in the budget. There were some things that we were able to get in there. There's a local farm share program that will help to bring more local food to local communities, and fingers crossed, because we'll see the final budget pretty soon here, but was able to get funding for that. North Carolina A&T with their land grant programs, able to get a lot of that done. Probably the most contentious piece of legislation that comes out of our committee is our big farm bill. And what is, I cannot fail to mention, in North Carolina, we have a lot of livestock. So the intersection of environmental justice and ag is why, even though I'm huge on ag, but I cannot support a farm bill that will continue to have inequity when it comes to our hog farms in Eastern North Carolina that are predominantly in low-lying areas that are prone to flooding, and in African-American or minority communities. We're also having a lot of issues with our poultry farms. So it's a delicate dance for me because oftentimes the major legislation, which is the Farm Bill, I'm unable to support, and very upfront with the chair about that, came into session saying, Senator, I hope that I can support this bill, but the last two cycles, I have not been able to support that specific piece of legislation. But it's also tricky for me as well, because I do represent an urban area. So Durham is the third largest city in the state of North Carolina, on track to be, the fourth, on track to be third. Probably in the next census, we will more than likely be the third. And Duke University is in my district, as well as North Carolina Central. So very urban. But what I will give our chair, he's a farmer in a rural area, white male, but understands the space of urban ag. And luckily I came in knowing that because I was advocating for Black farmers before becoming a state senator. That's a big part of how I got here. I was here all the time, lobbying alongside with Black farmers, sharing their concerns with members here. So luckily, a lot of the committee members knew me, and also through my consulting work, I've done a lot with Black farmers as well. So luckily came in enough with relationships to get some things done, but we still are in the minority. There's still a lot. We simply don't get definitely a lot of pushback with anything with equity. It was another 6 event where I shared my Black Farmer Restoration Program. I wanted to title it, Justice for Black Farmers, and ended up saying, Black Farmer Restoration, just because I knew the language would just be a little bit too strong, unfortunately, for my colleagues. But they still are clear on where I stand and what I know needs to happen in our state, because back to the livestock issue, just the inequity, every time I'm on the executive board for our Legislative Black Caucus, and whenever the big ag comes in the room, that's always our question. Okay, well, how many of those farms are owned by Black people? And the numbers are always very, very low. We are normally on the manufacturing lines and actually butchering the meat and all that, but not really seeing the full financial benefits of those industries. So that is always going to be something that's pretty contentious here in North Carolina, because we just kind of were pushed out of ag some years ago. Now folks are fighting to get back. So I've been working directly with some of those private companies to say, how can you give back to these local communities, through your corporate giving policies? How can we figure out a way to have more Black ownership of these facilities? How can we see more management level VP positions that are diverse? So I tell folks I legislate from 360 degrees. For me, it's not just about what happens in that committee. It's about how am I engaging with industry? How am I going directly to those lobbyists to say, okay, if you want X, Y, and Z, I need you to go back and tell, who's retaining your services X, Y, and Z as well. This is a two-way street. I'm receiving information, but, you run back and share, this for me as well. So it's still been a good experience. And also, as other folks have mentioned, energy is also in my committee as well as environmental issues. So I'm a self-proclaimed green brown girl. I do some consulting work with environmental groups as well. I'll actually be reaching out to a lot of you, a new opportunity. So I'll be tracking some legislation nationwide around environmental issues. But have to also give a shout out to the other young brown legislator we have, Senator DeAndre Salvador, who was actually an energy expert. And so we actually just passed a huge energy bill. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But we are in North Carolina. I just shared our political dynamics, but we do have carbon reduction goals in statute. And so for North Carolina to do that is huge, 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 cannot be understated. So I will say that has been the most bipartisan piece of legislation we have worked on, has been our energy bill. We were able to get all of leadership and the minority leadership all on board with that. We were able to get that through. So still a long way to go. I think folks still don't know how to take me, but I just keep on showing up. But here every day to continue to fight and move forward.
Yes, Senator Murdock, I love that you touched on corporate accountability, so to speak. That is something we will also dive into a little bit further in the questions. I also love meeting another Black woman that has worked in environmental policy. That was my past background in a 2016 energy bill in Michigan. So I just love to see it. We have quite a few questions already coming in the queue from audience members. So just for those who have been asking questions, we will break in the panel to answer a few audience questions. And also we've been adding links to the chats, from many us, that many of the conversations about bill introduction around some of the farmer equity bills. So please, again, take a look at the links in the chat as a reference and resource. Senator Pinckney, I want to turn the same question over to you as well, kind of your experience in the legislature with her on this.
Yeah, so as we were talking, I was sitting here thinking, and don't quote me on this because now I'm curious and I'm going to do the research. But so in the history of our state's legislature, there have only been 5 Black senators in our state's history. I was elected in 2020. 2 of them were elected in 2018, and I know neither of them served on the Ag committee. So, and I'm not sure about the first 2. So there's a chance that I'm the first Black person to have served on our state's Ag committee in the history of the state, which is like depressing in so many ways, but to a different kind of conversation to have. So that I kind of was just playing with that thought while we were talking. But one of the things that I think was most interesting to me is that our session this year started on Zoom. And we continue with committee hearings on Zoom through the entire year. And I remember the first Ag committee that we had, and there were only 2 this year. But I remember just sitting in this chair and like looking at the screen of just this all white older men. And I was like, this is a joke. Like, how is this is a joke. So that was an interesting, I think, kind of first experience and step into Ag. And then one of the things that I've noticed too is that, of the lobbyists who reach out and of the advocates who reach out to the broader Ag committee, they're all white. And those are the ones who seem to have the power to get the legislators to put forth any type of legislation. It's similar to what was said about kind of this idea of there have been very few bills that were presented that actually have anything to do with food. And so that has been just very interesting to watch play out. But one of the things that I have noticed is that as a Black woman, there are so many more organizations that have been reaching out to me to tell me what they're doing in farming, to tell me about the work in urban ag that they're doing, to tell me about what's going on downstate. And, I've been asking a lot of them, like, have you had these conversations with other legislators before? And no, like these are not the communities that get highlighted or get looked to when it comes time to make legislation around farming and ag. But there's so many out there, and Delaware is a small state, but there's so many out there who are doing this work that never get the opportunity to have their voices elevated when it comes time to lobby for bills. So when it comes down to the idea of like farmer equity bills, had that been introduced prior to myself and Rep. Dorsey Walker, there's no way that an equity bill would have been introduced. It's just not anything that they would have thought about. And so I think that has been really interesting. Rep. Dorsey Walker, I think most of you guys are probably familiar with her. She's been in ag a little longer than I have. And she's going to be leading our farmer equity bill. And she's so funny. We have an interesting dynamic because I am very much, let's call it justice for Black farmers. They're gonna know what we're here for. But Rep. Dorsey Walker's like, we gotta get the bill passed. We're gonna call it disadvantaged farmers. I'm like, okay. But in that floor speech, they're gonna know what we're here for, So it's been a very interesting kind of dynamic to go into this space that has potentially in my chamber never been represented by a Black individual, that is monopolized by white men in our state who only look to other white men to give them advice on legislation, and coming into this space as a more kind of rowdy, for lack of a better term, rowdy, radical individual. Just as a person, it's been really interesting to try to, one, have to learn all of this, but 2, wanting to make sure that everything that we're doing is centering Black and brown people and the struggles that we go through when it comes time to do this work. So that's all I have for now because it's early on in my experience with this, but a lot of observations that you guys have made me reflect on. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you, Senator Pinkney. And it seems like there's a common thread among all of you who shared this is just your experience on these committees, that you're having to get your colleagues to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, even if it's how you frame the naming of said legislation. And also too, it seems like maybe not as much rowdy per se, but like also just being no nonsense and unapologetic. And it seems like each of you are doing that in a way that some may deem as disruptive, but it's actually more so intentional. And so we're just gonna break really quickly because we had a few questions in the queue. We wanna make sure that these get answered. So I know Rep. Thomas had a question. So Rep. Thomas, going to give the floor to you to ask your question. Oh, I think, okay, she may have hopped off. Okay, well, we also have a question from Delegate Walker, who shared one, a thank you to each of the panelists for speaking your truth to power. Delegate Walker shared that she's the only Black female representative in both state houses in the state of West Virginia and has introduced a constitutional amendment for the right to food. She's working really closely with the state of Maine as their amendment will be on the ballot in November, and has never had an interest in being on an ag committee really until now. So I'm glad that we are having this conversation today. So her question for all of you is, where are the Black agriculture resources? She will reintroduce the amendment again in 2022. So is looking for some additional resources that support that. So if any, I see Rep. Harper is already unmuted, so I'm going to turn it to you first.
I mean, the first thing that came to my mind is that the Black agricultural resources are the same place that the white agricultural resources are, the same place that every other farmer or agribusiness is getting their resources from. Those are our resources too. What I'm finding is that we're just not taking advantage of them, or we're not getting the notice about them. We're not getting the outreach about them. We're not getting the technical support to maybe apply for them as much as other farmers are. And that was exactly the crux of our Farmer Equity Act, was to make sure that we are reaching out with whatever is coming from our state departments of agriculture and to benefit farmers. Small farmers, big farmers, all farmers, agribusinesses. Those same resources are available to farmers of color as well. And we are not taking advantage of them at the same levels that other communities are taking care of. And that's one. Two, are there specifically resources for Black farmers? I think that we're all in all of our states right now trying to create those avenues. As it relates to the state of Illinois, yes, we are definitely setting aside and getting into the general revenue fund, our budget, a dedicated line item specifically for socially disadvantaged farmers, which definitely includes Black farmers.
Yeah.
We've also called for the creation of a farmer disparity study to really get down to the nuts and bolts of what are those things policy-wise that we can affect that will have a drastic that will have a drastic impact on the way our farmers are able to operate, are able to get contracts, are able to participate in the current marketplace. Once we figure out what some of those things are, which we already know what they are, but you know, in government, you always got to do a study so that they can know what the things are. We know what they are. We know we got an issue with land loss and land access. We know that we have issue with getting our grant applications approved next to the same type of farmer that comes in our community who's not from our community and theirs get approved. We know that there are some inconsistencies in the way that farmers are funded, both on a for-profit basis or if you're in the nonprofit world. And so those are things that I think folks are working on in the state, but those are things that we also could use help on sounding the alarm about. So I'm going to stop there. But my first point was we got the same resources that other people have, and we have not been taking advantage of them. And in that, as we continue to study the area and provide our numbers and the reasons why we have less land loss, the reasons why we're not participating in certain markets, that's our opportunity now in state government or even federal government to create certain incentives, programs, policies, and funding to meet the specific needs that Black farmers have more so than other socially disadvantaged farmers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just wanted to chime in, couldn't skip over adding, we're a resource. I just really have to thank SIX. I wasn't new legislative member last year, and I immediately cannot remember how I connected with Kendra. Maybe it was an email or something, and just started attending webinars like you all are doing today, and just kept up with folks. I said, of course, all of us, we're ag people. So was following, Senator Booker and Warnock's, Justice for Black Farmers bill at the federal level. And I said, surely somebody else wants to, file this at the state level. And that's how I got connected with the representative in South Carolina. I said, I'm looking for, a Southern example. I want to file something that's similar. So definitely, I think the network that SIX has created, and through that got connected with Senator Pinkney, Representative Brent, and the other representative whose names escape me out of Delaware, just getting to know Representative Harper. But there is a community, as you see today, we all go through similar challenges. And if it's, as we're getting our medical cannabis bill over the finish line, we'll be, really leaning on Representative Harper to say, how can we get these carve outs to make sure the Black community is not left out of this licensing process? So I think we are all resources. And also, as they mentioned, the resources that already exist, go to the USDA. Luckily for us here in North Carolina, Congresswoman Alma Adams is on the US Ag Committee. And so if I have an issue, I go straight to her. I say, okay, Congresswoman Adams, X, Y, and Z, so I think utilize all those resources that are already readily available, but you make them fit into, your equity mission. They are there, they're readily available. There's also a National Association of Black Farmers. We have one here at the state level. So I have quarterly calls with them now with this medical cannabis. We're talking every week. And if it doesn't exist, create it. Luckily for me, because of my professional work, had a really solid directory of just who are the Black farmers in North Carolina. But what I found is there was no connection to the work in this building. And that is how I got here. I said, you don't have any lobbyists, you don't have any representation. So you will, which I think Representative Harper mentioned earlier, have to kind of piece it together for yourself to see what makes sense for your state. What I found was there was a lot of knowledge, but none of that gets connected to any legislation of any sort. So I really view that as my job is, when I'm out here with you in the field, on these farms, okay, download it, break it down to me, and I will take that back to bill drafting and say, okay, this is what we need, So, and also utilizing them, the sign you see behind me, Farmer Strong, we do a lobby day here in the General Assembly. I bring them all here, we divide them up, and I say, okay, you need to go to your representatives. You need to tell them what you're telling me. And that's something that we do every year in partnership actually with the Farm Bureau, which again is an existing resource, but I just make sure the Black farmers show up.
Thank you so much. And I know we're almost at time. So we want to get in one more question, just a quick snippet. And that is, at the end of the day, you all are all in leadership positions within your legislature and just working with the Ag Committee. And really, for many of you, represent the first or the only. So what advice would you give Black women legislators interested in ag policy, especially as it relates to the intersections that it has with other policy issues relative to democracy, such as voting rights, that impact a lot of Black and Brown communities as well? And I'll just go down the line really quickly, and then we'll close out. So Senator Murdock, to you.
I think the advice is to be yourself. I'm in a Southern state and I'm still unapologetically advocating for my people. We've lost so much time, centuries of not being invested in. We didn't even get on, predatory lending from banks where land was stolen. So when I talk about reparations, that is why I talk about reparations, because we know for a fact the Pickford lawsuit was tied to North Carolina, where it showed even with USDA, a lot of very concerning things were going on, where land was also lost, resources were not provided. So I think my advice is just know your why, because it is hard. We are not welcomed in this space. So you have to know why you're fighting. And for me, it's for my ancestors. It's literally for my grandfather that's no longer here with me. And so just to be unapologetic, be yourself, be bold. Because as we just heard from West Virginia, sometimes you literally are the only one. So there's so many millions of people that you bring with you, even if they aren't physically in that space with you.
Thank you. And Senator Pinkney?
Thank you, Lauren, and to all of the amazing women that we had this conversation with today. I think my advice would be to not be afraid to ask for help, and not be afraid to be new in this space and still be loud and unapologetic about what you're trying to get done. On top of everything else, like I also was never interested in politics until never interested in running for office until I ran for office, and that kind of just happened. And so here I am. So all of it has been a learning curve, but that does not stop your competence. That does not stop your determination and your why. So if you know that you have a good why, if you are centering Black and Brown communities and Black and Brown families, you're never going to go in the wrong direction. Just find the people to ask for help. And as you can see, like we're all willing to help. We're all willing to have these conversations. We're all willing to support one another. I have to give a shout out to Six, who has connected me in this space. This is where I met Senator Murdock. And then I think a couple of weeks after that, we were together in DC. And it was just an amazing connection because of Six. So don't be afraid to be in these spaces. I don't know that there's any more of a trusting and safe space than when you're in a connection with Black women. So do not feel uncomfortable about approaching any of us for support and help once this call disconnects, because it really is about a community and being able to know what are our counterparts doing in other states. How can we work together? How can I advocate for what you're trying to do? And how can I learn from it and make it effective and useful for my state here as well?
Thank you so much, Senator Pinkney. And yes, this is a Black woman legislator sisterhood of support networks. So, Representative Harper, some last words of advice.
Yes, I think for any legislators that are thinking of, making the dive into agriculture, I just say get in where you fit in, find out not just what's important to you, your family, your constituents, and go. The industry is so big, they're so wide, it's so multifaceted. It's connected to so many other issues with equity and systemic racism that we deal with in our communities. You can't go wrong. We need even more. We need more advocates in this issue of agriculture and food access and economic development through food and agriculture and education around it. We need more. So I would definitely encourage other legislators, no matter where you're from, to join your ag committee. And even if you can't, take a look at what's going on in other states. One thing that has been so helpful to me, also, thank you, Six, for bringing us together. But even before this cohort, I found myself going to the legislative conferences and going to the different websites and just seeing what other states are doing in this area of food access, food equity, food justice. Once we start sharing our legislation, we can start getting those benefits and spreading the education and spreading the awareness in all of our states. So that would be my recommendation. And again, I can't say how helpful it is to have such a convening and such a group within Six that helps bring us together. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Representative Harper. And yes, we have links in the chat to both our CROP network as well as Democracy Champions cohort, which are both legislative networks within our democracy department as well as our food and ag department. So if you are not signed up as a member of either cohort, please feel free to fill out those links and do so, because we want to make sure that you are able to participate in every convening that we have available possible, whether virtual or in person. And last but not least, Representative Brent, turning it over to you for any last words of advice.
Thank you so much for bringing us together. And like my distinguished ladies have all said from ag, is that this is a small place and that you do see the same people. So it's definitely, Six has definitely been a huge support system for myself, but you have to just know the players. Shout out, and here in Ohio, we had a Black Farmers Day, and look who's on the back: Ohio Farm Bureau, Nationwide, and just different other groups that were very supportive of wanting to uplift Black farmers. People are only going to uplift whatever you decide to use your voice towards. So when we talk about how can we, make sure that Black farmers are included, well, you have to say something, because there was a time there was no type of Black Farmers Week here in Ohio. Now it is a Black Farmers Week, where a lot of different farm organizations have decided to put their efforts into that when Black people decided to say something. So we have to just be very intentional, know these organizations and know what their resources are. They have so many resources about banking, certified seeds, land quality, trying to connect you with the particular realtor that they can help you in this space. But just like Chairwoman Harper said, the same resources that you're already familiar with, they're available for you already. You just have to be very consistent about what needs you actually do have. And that's something I had to get over, because I'm like, why don't they have any Black people here? Where is this? And I realized like I needed to be the one who needed to amplify that voice when it comes to those things. And also too, if your state does not have something specifically for Black farmers, like an annual meeting or a quarterly meeting, like the other senator said before, then develop. If you don't see it, develop it. Like nothing's going to happen. No one's going to come save you or make your ag department more equitable or more culturally sensitive if you are not the one saying it. Trust me, no one's coming to say it at all. They will actually probably prefer you go sit in the corner and go talk to yourself. So being very unapologetic about the needs to expand upon this. And if you're looking for a way to always try to get those super conservative people to buy into something, say like, well, this is going to help increase our state's population. And if we don't do this, this is why nobody wants to stay here. That sometimes works too. But know your why, know these organizations, know what they can do, and be very unapologetic about showing up. Showing up. When the Farm Bureau has something, show up. When they have their lobby day, make sure you have a meeting with them. Making sure you go to your state's farm science review, making sure that you are active in your county's Farm Bureau organization, and showing up with that, because people don't have an interest in things that no one's advocating for. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you all. This was such dynamic dialogue, and leaving us on those words of knowing your why and showing up, and I'm going to add showing out, is really what is a necessity for doing this. You also helped to kick off the policy series of our No Democracy Without Black Women project. So we were so excited to have this be the first policy area of focus. It's so great to see your faces leading on this work. And just thank you again for what you do every day, truly an inspiration. And we will be sure to send out some key wrap up with the recording, as well as some key resources that came out